Okay, AutoKey is a great little utility to trigger scripts, and the problem I had with it was that it only had 6 different modifier keys, and I happened to want to use one that wasn't used by these. First of all, I didn't know how to trigger the hyper or meta keys with my particular keyboard, and the other keys were too commonly used in my other apps. So I wanted to make a combination that was rarely used, and in particular I wanted to use a function 8 key as my modifier. And by default that's not possible with AutoKey, but after much trial and error I found a way that I could do that, and it involved remapping my keyboard for that one key, remapping in my case the function 8 key to hyper, which doesn't seem to be in use in my Ubuntu installation. So before we get started though, I'd like to show you how it works, but I want to mention that this is something you should think twice about before doing. It will void your Linux warranty. There's no money back if it fails, and it's likely to interfere with other application shortcuts that use that function key that you've remapped. In other words, you can't use it for 2 different things. In general, it's not a good idea to modify your core system behavior, especially if you're sharing this computer with somebody else, or if you are going back and forth between this computer and another computer that is not customized. So in other words, it's a last resort. Use at your own risk. I wanted to do it. Works fine for me, but your mileage may vary. So the way I did it was open up a terminal here, and I use a little utility called Xmodmap to see what our mapping is. And I think of the left column as virtual or abstract modifiers. Shift, lock, and control are pretty much self-explanatory. Mod 1 through 5 are basically, it sounds arbitrary names which are mapped to Alt, numlock, super, which is the Windows key, and hyper left. But I noticed that hyper right wasn't in use, and I thought that might be useful to keep in mind. I also noticed that mod 3 was not in use either by any physical key on the right side here on my keyboard. So with that in mind, I thought, I wonder if I map my function 8 key to hyper right, which isn't in use anywhere, and I map hyper right to mod 3, maybe that would make hyper right available by my function 8 key, and I would be able to use it in AutoKey. And to do that, I would need to know what the key code for the function 8 key was. So there's a little utility called XEV. Type that, and it pulls up a little GUI, which when you move your mouse around in the window, gives you all kinds of garbage information that you need to know. But the key point is, as long as your mouse is in that window and you press any key, it will give you what the key code is. And third line from the bottom there, it's key code 74. And as you can see in parentheses, that corresponds to function 8 functionality according to X. Now, I'd like to change that. And the way we do that is I create a configuration file, custom creation file, configuration file that does not exist by default, at least not in the user's directory. I create that file, and it's very simple. It's 3 lines, and it needs these 3 lines. The first one is clear mod 3. That's what the docs say. It may or may not be necessary because, as you just saw in Xmodmap, there is nothing mapped to mod 3 that we know of, but I did it just to be sure. Then I map the key code 74, which, as we just saw, is the function 8 key. I map that to hyper right, which is the modifier that we aren't using and hope to use. And then I add mod 3 to hyper right also. Now, if we're lucky, this will work. I save it in my home directory, and I save it with the hidden file Xmodmap. Surprise, surprise. Okay, now it might be shocking to know this, but Xmodmap doesn't change. What's wrong? Well, It's very simple. We have to log out and log back in. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to stop the recording, but I'll bring you right back in as soon as I've logged in, and we'll see whether it took. Okay, we just logged back in, and let's see what Xmodmap has to say about our mapping. And voila, there we have it. Mod 3, just as we wanted, is mapped to a hyper right. Now we still don't know for sure if our mapping of the function key code 74 has worked, so let's check that. XEV is our little utility that we use to check key coding, and hitting the F8 key, just as we hoped, third line from the bottom, key code 74. But now in parentheses, instead of saying F8, it says hyper right, which is exactly what we want. We want the F8 key to trigger hyper functionality. So now anytime that we basically have a new modifier key that was not available to us before, that we can combine with any other key on the keyboard, and basically increased our functionality in AutoKey thereby. Remember, it does disable that one Function 8 key, so you may want to choose a different one that you're not using. But in my case, this was my favorite, and I used it before, and I still like that combination. So hope that was helpful to you. If you like the video, feel free to give it a like and share it. And you have a good day. Thanks.